Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on Investigation Bible. I am your biblical investigator, Bill Kaufman, and we're now 10-8 on another episode. Well, this is a further episode, a continuing running story here on famous biblical people and when they lived and kind of what contributions they had, why their stories are recorded in the Holy Scriptures. And so we've gone from the people like Adam and Eve and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Joshua and now and then some judges. We went through Deborah and Samson, I believe, and we did those. And there's other people. There's a lot of people we're not touching on. Just kind of some highlights of when people lived and what they did. That kind of stuff. So this week, we're going to move on to a book in the Bible. It's a very short book. It's only got 4 chapters, but it is really good. One of my favorite stories, period, of any story ever written. And it is old. It goes back really far, over 3,000 years ago. Now, this is the book of Ruth. All right. Now, Ruth, the setting. Let's go to the setting. She lived in the Middle East. Probably born somewhere around 1200 BC, same time as Samson. We talked about Samson last week. Ruth and Samson are contemporaries. Now, he lived north of where she's going to live. He lived in at the tribe of Dan, and that's north west of where Judah is. Now, she lived in Bethlehem. Well, that's where she finished her story. She didn't start it there. We'll get into that in a minute. But they lived about the same time, maybe within 50 years of each other. So anyway, that gives us our time frame around 1100 to 1200 BC. That's when this girl was on this earth. And she is, her story starts off with not even her. It's called the Book of Ruth, but it starts off of this Jewish family, because they're from Judah. They live in Bethlehem, and Elimelech is the dad. Naomi is the mom. Mahlon, probably, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Mahlon, we're going to call him that, is one of the sons, and Kilian is the other son. Okay, so this family of 4 is living at this time. It's like about the same time as Samson's alive, and it's bad there in Judah, and it's bad in Bethlehem. There's a drought going on. There's a famine going on. Gideon lived similar times, and it's possible that even some of the problems that they were experiencing was when Gideon's time, the enemy came through and seeded the fields with salt and kept it from growing. It's possible that is at the same time Gideon was on the earth, because these people were contemporaries of each other. They're different stories in the Bible, but they're contemporaries. And so it's possible that maybe one of those enemies had seeded the fields with salt and made it so that people couldn't even produce grain, okay? And Bethlehem is known as the city of bread. That's what it means. And so their main claim to fame is all the bread that they can do because of all the grain that they can grow, the barley grain, the wheat grain, and all that. And because it's a very fertile area for that. So anyway, Elimelech and his wife and their 2 sons decide to move to better land, a more prosperous area. And that was Moab. So they go over to Moab. Now, Moab's just on the other side of the desert. There's water between them, and they have to go around it. So they probably went south and up around, and then they got to Moab. And it would be where the Jordan is now, okay, the country of Jordan. And that's where they end up. Well, they get there, and they stay for a while, because Mahlon married a girl named Ruth. And his brother Kilian married a girl named Orpah. Not Oprah, but Orpah. And I don't know if, that has anything to do with Oprah's name. I have no idea. But Orpah was the name of this girl. And she was a Moabitess, once again, 11 to 1200 BC. So over 3,200 years ago. And they lived in the country of Moab. And after they move there and the boys grow up, they marry these girls. Well, somewhere in there, Elimelech dies. Now, we don't know if he was old. We don't know if he died in a combat situation. We don't know. Because one thing that people did every year was these, in this time, not just in the Bible people, but all across the world, as soon as spring came, man, they'd fight each other for their goods and services and land. That's what people did. All right. So they go do that. They go fight each other for goods and services and land. And when they do that, people die. So we don't know if Elimelech was killed in one of these things or disease, or maybe he was just old. We don't know. But so Naomi now has 2 sons and 2 daughters-in-law. And shortly thereafter, Mahlon and Chilion also die. They don't apparently leave any children. Neither of them had any kids yet. I don't know why. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they just decided to wait until they got older. I don't even know. It doesn't tell us. But they didn't have any kids apparently. And both of the girls, Ruth and Orpah, they decide to follow and be loyal to their mother-in-law, Naomi. Don't know why. Maybe they didn't have good families in Moab. Maybe they did. I don't know the reason. Doesn't tell us. But what happens is then Naomi decides, I'm going back home. She heard the famine was over, crops were being able to be harvested again. Things were pretty good back where she grew up, and that was in Bethlehem. And so she's going to go back home. And she tells her daughters-in-law, you don't want to come with me. I'm going back to my people. You stay with your people. Go to your mom and dad and, find another man and marry another guy and start a family and have a life. I mean, that's what she tells them. But and actually Orpah agrees and says, yeah, I'm going to go home. Maybe she had a better family life. I don't even know. I just know she went back. And Ruth, she says, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with you. And Naomi's like, no, you don't want to do that. And Ruth says, yes, I do. In fact, where you go is where I'm going. Your home is my home. Your people will be my people. This is an actual quote. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Understand, the Moabites, they didn't worship the God of Israel. They had their own gods. And so Ruth undoubtedly grew up with her own gods, not the God of Israel, not the true God. But now she's kind of realized there is a true God and that it's the God of the Israelites. And so she tells Naomi, your God will be my God. And so she goes back with her. Well, they move back to Bethlehem. And when they do, this is the most interesting story. When they come back, they're poor. They don't have anything. The land can be harvested again, but her husband's land, Elimelech had his own land. He did. We learn that in the story as it unfolds. But it probably wasn't being harvested because there was nobody to harvest it. So there was nothing for them at this point. And so they're going to starve if they don't do something. And it's really great. It says that Ruth, who knew the laws of that day, she decided to go out and glean the fields. Now, what that means, in that era, in that time, there was no state welfare for anybody, any poverty-stricken anybody. So God laid out in the Old Testament, in the books of Moses, which had already been written. This is 1200, 1100. Those were written in 1400s, maybe up to 1500 BC. So this is a few hundred years later. So these books are already written and they know what they say. And God laid out in the books of Moses that you have to let the poor glean the fields. Like if you have a lot of land and you're successful, that's good and that's fine. You've been blessed by God. You got a lot of land, you're successful. When you harvest your harvest, you don't take everything off. You leave a certain percentage back on the vine, and anything that falls to the ground, you don't pick up. That's for the poor. That's for the people. That's for the people who have nothing, and they will come and get that stuff. That's what that's for. And it's called gleaning, okay? And this was practiced across this time in Israel. And so Ruth knows this, and she says, I'm going to go out and glean, and I'm going to find somebody to, field to glean some food for us. So she goes out, and there's a barley harvest going on, and this guy's name is Boaz that owns the land. And Boaz is out in the fields, doing this in the harvest. He's got a lot of people working for him. He's kind of a big shot. And this girl comes along and she starts gleaning. Well, she's not an Israelite. Most of this was probably humans are humans. That's what we are. And we're often prejudiced against other people. And a lot of Israelites were undoubtedly prejudiced against Moabites. And so it could have been a problem for her. And they knew her story. They knew where she was from, that she'd been married to one of their people, but now he's dead and she's staying with Naomi. And so she could have run into some problems, but she did not. And she gleaned. Well, Boaz saw her. Now, I don't know how good looking she was. I'm assuming she was kind of pretty. And the reason I'm assuming that is because when he saw her, he said, "Ooh, who's that?" That's what it says. He goes, "Who's that?" And the people said, "Oh, that's Ruth. That's Mahlon's wife, or Mahlon that died. That's his widow, and she's staying with Naomi when Naomi came back." And Boaz knew Naomi and knew Mahlon and knew Elimelech, but now he's met Ruth for the first time. So he says, "Well, I tell you what, guys, make sure that you let her glean." And then he even goes so far as to say, "Don't just let her glean. Drop stuff in front of her. Make sure she gets the best of the best." Well, she does, and then she goes home and she brings a ton of stuff, a lot more than gleaners would ever really get. Let's just say a gleaner would get $10 worth of stuff. Well, she just got $200 worth of stuff. I'm just making that up, but I mean, I'm just saying she got a lot more than what Ruth was expecting or than Naomi was expecting. And so she comes home, brings it to Naomi, and Naomi goes, "What? Where did you get all this stuff? Whose field did you glean in? For goodness sakes." And she says, "Oh, it was a man named Boaz, I think. It was Boaz. Yeah, that's his name." Right then, Naomi lights up. Bing. And by the way, she was not a happy woman. She changed her name when she came back to Israel. She said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara," which means bitter, because I've lost my husband and my sons. And I have no future. No one's going to have children. I'm not going to have grandchildren. I'm bitter. Okay, so call me Mara. But this Mara, bitter lady, all of a sudden Naomi kind of smiles and says, "Hey, wait a minute. Boaz is one of our kinsman redeemers." Now, you got to understand what that means. There was something called the Levirate law back in those days. It was also in the Bible, but it was practiced across the Middle East. If you were married, like let's just say I was married, okay? Well, I am married. I've been married. Actually, on the 14th was my February. That's my 36th wedding anniversary. Married in 1988. So my wife and I have 5 daughters and 2 granddaughters. But anyway, nonetheless, I am married. But let's just say I died back when I was young. All right. Wouldn't really, I don't think, count when you're old. But when Barbara was still of age where she could have babies and everything, say she was 30 years old, and I died. Well, then it's my brother. If I have a brother, and I do, it's his responsibility. I mean, he has to do it. He has to go marry her. Now, I'm sure that people didn't always do it, and there was a lot of probably like, "I don't want that," from the girl and the guy, but this was the law, so that you would have a son to have a child, and that boy, when he grew up, he wasn't my brother's son, he was mine still. He got all my land and my property and my name. He kept my name and as his father, even though the biological father was the uncle. That's the way the system worked. And by the way, it wasn't just in the Bible. It's called the Levirate laws, and they've been doing it for hundreds of years. We read about it in things like the Nuzian tablets and stuff like that. And so anyway, this is what people did in those days. Well, the kinsman redeemer, the guy that's a close relative that has to save the family's name and property and do all these things, well, Boaz is one of those people. And so Naomi says, "Oh my goodness, he gave you all that extra food, didn't he?" She goes, "I don't know. I got it. I got a lot of food. I kept dropping stuff in front of me." Okay, that was Boaz. He saw you and he likes you. So what I want you to do is go back to that place tomorrow. And they go back tomorrow and they glean again. And he just gets she gets all kinds of food. She comes home. She goes, "I met him. He's really nice," because he talks to her and he says, "Hey, I'm really happy with how much loyalty you showed to Naomi, and that I hear you're, serving our God now. He doesn't say it that way, but I mean, I'm sure I'm reading into it. But he does say the loyalty you've shown Naomi, and I'm really happy with that. And by the way, undoubtedly he's like attracted to her, because it's totally normal to be attracted to each other. That's not an abnormal thing. And I remember the first time I started liking girls. I can tell you the names of those girls in junior high that I walked by in high school. Right now, I don't know where they're at. I don't know anything about them, but I was in love, and because they were so pretty, and that's normal. That's normal behavior. Well, this is what Boaz must have felt when he saw Ruth, and so he's talking to her, and trying to be nice. Well, Naomi says, "Okay, I got a plan. What you need to do," it's so interesting. Not much different. Not much has changed. She says, "Go take a bath." That's what she says. Put on your best perfume. That's what she says. Put on your best clothes. In other words, look your best. Then go to where he sleeps. He's working right now because it's the harvest. So he's in the threshing field. He's up in this area that they thresh the grain. What that was winds would come through at night. Israel. It still does, by the way. It's just the way the terrain works and stuff. And so what they would do is they'd take the grain and they would throw it in the air, and the chaff, which wasn't valuable, would blow away, and then the stuff that was valuable would fall to the floor. And then they do it again and again and again. That's called threshing. And then by the time you're done with it, you got a whole bunch of really good barley, because that's the barley harvest. You do it for wheat also. But this is barley harvest. And so he throws it up in the air, and then then he doesn't want anybody. There's no police departments back then. There's no locks. There's no any of this stuff. So padlocks didn't exist yet. So he and his men slept with the grain. They stayed with it so nobody could come and steal it. Well, Naomi says, "Go up and lay at his feet. And when he sees you, he'll know what to do. Tell him that he's a kinsman redeemer, and he'll understand, and he'll tell you what to do." And so Naomi's clearly, obviously, of the mindset that, Boaz is stuck on Ruth here. Boaz and Ruth sitting in a tree, Kissing. And so that's what she's thinking. And that's what happens. It is what happens. He wakes up. Ruth comes and lays at his feet. When she wakes up, or when he wakes up, he says, "Why? Who are you?" And because he doesn't recognize her, remember it's nighttime. She goes, "It's me, Ruth." And she says, "Oh my goodness, Ruth, what are you doing here?" And Ruth says, "Well, you are the kinsman, and we could really use you." She doesn't say this, but I'm just going to say it our way. "So will you marry me? And then we can start fixing everything that's a problem for me and Naomi." And he says, "Oh my goodness, yes, I will." He accepts, but he says, "But I got to get some stuff in order. And because there's somebody that's actually closer kinsman than me to you. So maybe he's a second cousin and there's a first cousin in there. I don't know. Maybe there's an uncle and he's his first cousin. It doesn't explain what the closer relationship is, but there is a closer relationship to Naomi and than he is. So he says, "I'm going to work this out." So she comes back and he gives her some more barley. That's the funny thing. He goes, "Don't go back to seeing your mother-in-law without all empty-handed now. Go back and bring some barley." So, which was valuable. And she does. And she tells her mother-in-law what's going on. Ruth does. And Naomi says this, says, "That man will not rest until all this is settled up," which was true. So what he did was he went before the gate. And in those days, and we're talking for quite a few years, hundreds and maybe even thousands of years, the city gate was where all the laws, all the rules, all the decisions, all the judging of that city was done. And so he sets up 10 people, if I remember correctly, and elders of the city. And then he sits there and he waits for this other guy to come by that's closer relative than he is. And he says, it doesn't say his name, so we're just going to call him Bob. "Hey, Bob." He says, "Oh, hi, Boaz." He says, "You know what? Naomi's back." "Yeah, I heard that." "No, Boaz, yeah." "Well, she wants to sell some of Elimelech's land. She wants to get rid of some Elimelech's land, and you are the closest relative that could redeem that land. You are the first person in line. Now, so tell me if you want it, because if you don't want it, I want it. That's what he says in front of the judges of that time, the elders of the city. And well, what he says is that other guy, Bob, for lack of a better name, he says, yeah, I want Elimelech's land. That's cool. I get to get Elimelech's land? Awesome. I'm going to increase my holdings. All right. And he's probably even thinking I could probably give her pennies on the dollar because she's really hurting. I mean, that's probably what he's thinking. It didn't say that, but, kind of reading into it a little bit. And he says, okay, good. You get to have the land. By the way, Ruth's daughter-in-law comes with the deal. Naomi's daughter-in-law comes with the deal. Ruth, you got to marry her. Well, I don't know. He gives an excuse that says, well, that will probably cause problems with my own property rules. Maybe it did. I don't understand all the laws of that time. But I can say this. It's probably he just didn't like Moabites. More than likely, he just didn't like them. They were fighting wars against each other. I mean, he just probably didn't like them. And so he's like, well, I can't. If she's coming with the deal, I can't do the deal. Because then he would have to have a kid with her, and then her kid would be Mahlon's, not his. And he would put all this effort into, building up her farm and everything and making profit, and only to give it to her, if she has a son, only to give it to her son, and it won't be his. It'll be Mahlon's through Elimelech. Okay, like that line. And he knows that, so he says, I don't want nothing to do with this. Well, then Boaz steps up and marries her. It's that simple. He just steps up and says, yeah, well, great, I'll marry you. And he does. But you can see how he kind of tricked the guy. He didn't just come up to him and say, hey, you don't really want to marry that girl, do you? Yeah, I mean, come on. You don't want nothing to do with her. No, he did it really well. And so all the elders saw it. And so he had no recourse. He can't come back later and say, hey, you tricked me out of my property. No, he doesn't get to do that. So anyway, Boaz marries Ruth, and they have a wedding. It's recorded in the 4th chapter. And the people say something really interesting. They give him a toast, and they say, may your offspring be like Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. Now, they're all Judites, so they're from Judah. These are all people from their great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy was Judah, which is his dad was Jacob, and his grandfather was Isaac, and his great-grandfather was Abraham. Okay, so, and the tribe is named after Judah, all right? Well, these people say, may your offspring be like Perez. And, well, who's Perez? Well, he's the son of Tamar and Judah. What a crazy story that is. Just real quickly, Judah has a son who marries this girl named Tamar, and he dies. And so because of the Levirate laws, his next son marries Tamar, and he dies. Well, the third son's too young to marry yet. He's just a boy, and Tamar's a woman. But he promises, yeah, when he gets to be old enough to marry, I'll give him to you two to have a son with. And because that was the laws of those days. But he doesn't do it. And Tamar recognizes that he's not doing it once the youngest son is grown up. So she actually tricks him, and she pretends to be a prostitute. She's not a prostitute. And she actually has a physical relationship, we'll just say, with Judah. But he doesn't know who she is because she's all veiled up. And she gets pregnant by Judah, and then she has a son. When he finds out that she's pregnant, and he gets indignant, but he doesn't want to marry her. He's doing this probably for himself because he doesn't want to marry off his youngest son to her because the other two died, and he probably was like, I don't want to lose my third son to this lady. But it's not. So he's going to actually, he's still the head of the household, so he's going to actually do something about this, maybe even have her stoned to death. But then she comes before him and says, guess what? It's your kid. And she had it's a way, he left his staff there and stuff. So, but anyway, she proves it. Here's your stuff. And he's like, oh my gosh, you are more righteous than me. And he doesn't kill her, of course. And they have a son, his name Perez. Perez has a kid who 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 has a kid. And eventually that kid is in line to David and all the way to the Messiah. But they don't know that yet. They just say Perez, which I think is interesting because this is why. Boaz is going to have he's going to have a son with Ruth. They're going to get married and they're going to have a son, and his name is Obed. Okay, and Obed. See that toast was a prophecy to some degree, because Obed is the father of a guy named Jesse. Eventually, he has to grow up and have kids, and that kid is Jesse. Jesse grows up, and he ends up having at least 10 kids. Jesse does. We know of 2 daughters, and we know of 8 sons. And the 8th son, number 8, is a guy who everybody in the world knows, and that's David. Okay? So King David is the 8th son of Jesse out of 10 kids. 2 daughters at least, maybe more. But we have 2 daughters, or 2 sisters of David mentioned in the Bible. And so there's at least that many. And then so Jesse's dad was Obed, and Obed's mom is Ruth. Isn't that crazy? I mean, that's nuts, man. But it's the way it worked out. And so right through this line, all the way through Perez, from Abraham to Isaac to Judah to Perez, all the way down through Ruth is the line of David, and through the line of David comes the Messiah. That's all planned by God. That's amazing. It's incredible. And that's the book of Ruth. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about their offspring, David, because he's the most famous person. Well, probably not the most famous, but he's one of the most famous people in the Bible. I mean, everybody in the world knows who he is. They know who. Okay, pretty much everybody that's educated in this world knows who Adam and Eve are. Whether they believe that was true or not, they know who they are. Everybody knows who Noah and the ark is. I mean, everybody. I don't care what religion you are, what culture you are, from China to South America to Europe, it doesn't matter. You know these stories. You know who those people are. You don't know everybody in the Bible, but everybody knows those people. Everybody knows Abraham. Over half the population of this planet calls Abraham their father, because Muslims do, Christians do, and Jews do. So, the Jewish people, their father is Abraham. Christians, through being grafted in, it's a long story, but we call Abraham our father. And Muslims, they call Abraham their father, but not through Isaac. They go through Ishmael, his oldest son. But that's the way over half this planet knows who Abraham is. We all know who Moses is, because everybody knows the Old Testament in the world. I mean, unless you're like, there's some tribes on islands that don't know, but I mean, I'm going to go with 99% of the population of the world has heard of Moses, okay? Well, David's in that category. Now, the other people we just mentioned, Elimelech, Naomi, Ruth, Orpah. Everybody knows Oprah, but not everybody knows Orpah. And Boaz, probably don't know him. I mean, most people don't. But David, everybody knows David, because King David is famous throughout the world. He killed the giant and all that kind of stuff with the sling. And people know that story around the world. So King David, we're going to talk about him next and these famous people. But we just talked about his great-grandma or great-great-grandma, or however many greats, because they didn't always record everybody. In fact, even here, when it says that in the book of Ruth, it says that Obed was born, that Ruth and Boaz had Obed, and then it actually says in the Bible that to Naomi, you're no longer Mara, you're not bitter anymore, but you're happy again because you have a son named Obed. You have a son now. Well, it's not her son, but they considered you, if you were an ancestor, to be a son or daughter of that person. That's how they did it. So sometimes I think in the Bible, people say, well, that doesn't fit, like how many people and how long it was. Well, it's because not everybody's recorded, because they didn't need to. And nobody thought anything about it back in those days. It's just the way it was. So I don't know exactly how many great-grandmas Ruth is, but she is the grandmother a few times over backwards of King David. So anyway, great story. It's amazing. It's read it for yourself. It's very short. It's only 4 chapters. It has everything. It has tragedy. It has victory. It has joy. It has sadness. It has a cliffhanger where is she going to have to marry the other guy that she doesn't know and she doesn't want to because she likes Boaz and Boaz likes her. All that little conflict that we put in all our movies that we like. Well, it's in this book. Okay, so Short little book, but oh my goodness, what a story. All right, well, thank you for joining us this week. We are now 10:10 on this episode of Investigation Bible, and next week we'll see you again.